Every year seems like the worst year ever for slow starting studs. But in reality, it's something that happens every single year. Now I could just sit here and tell you to trust me, or I could actually show you the facts that support that. Because let me tell you this, the quickest way to lose your fantasy football season is to give up on a stud way too early, have a league mate pick him up, and then beat him with you later on. What is going on, Headliner Nation? Hopefully everyone is doing well out there. Today we're going to be talking about why patience is key in fantasy football. Now I also know that this is a game that is dominated by the male species, and patience isn't the strong suit of a lot of us. But if you really want to find success in this game, you have to look a little bit deeper than just the box scores. There is so much more that needs to be taken into account when you're trying to find success in fantasy football. Really, there's only one decision that can be made with little to no thought. And that decision is to become a channel member here on YouTube. You can hit the join button right now underneath this video, get access to our Discord, member-only live streams, member-only shows each week as well. But the best part about all of it is it's a toxic-free community, and those are super hard to come by these days online. So if you're looking for a group of people that you can enjoy playing fantasy football alongside, this is your chance to do so. But all right, let's go ahead and dive into today's show. Now, today we're going to be looking at wide receivers to go through this exercise. I want to see how often do top 12 finishing wide receivers start off a little bit slow. And we're going to do this by going through the last 3 years, because I know there's a lot of people out there that really just want to bail on some guys after 4 weeks. But after we take a look at the history from the last 3 years, we'll go ahead and look at a few slow starting studs from this year to see if they have a great chance at bouncing back or not. But first, let's dive into the history and go back and look at how many top 12 finishers at the wide receiver position over the last 3 years started off a little bit slow through the first 4 weeks of the season. And let's start off with 2021, where our top 12 finishers that season were Cooper Kupp, Davante Adams, Deebo Samuel, Ja'Marr Chase, Justin Jefferson, Tyreek Hill, Stefon Diggs, Deontay Johnson, Mike Evans, DK Metcalf, Keenan Allen, and Chris Godwin. Now, as we go through this list of players, one thing that I really noticed is some of the guys who started off hot definitely finished hot, and then also there were a few guys that started off a little bit slow, yet finished inside the top 12. Cooper Kupp through 4 weeks was the wide receiver 1, finished as the wide receiver 1. Davante Adams was the wide receiver 11, finished as the wide receiver 2. Deebo started off hot, he stayed hot. Ja'Marr Chase started off fairly hot, stayed hot. Same with Justin Jefferson and Tyreek Hill. Stefon Diggs, though, through 4 weeks in 2021, he was the wide receiver 19 overall, finished as the wide receiver 7. After him, it was Deontay Johnson, who was the wide receiver 24 overall after 4 weeks, finished inside the top 10. Mike Evans was the wide receiver 18 after 4 weeks. DK Metcalf, the wide receiver 15. Keenan Allen, the wide receiver 20. Chris Godwin, the wide receiver 14. So you can see the back half of the top 12 weren't even in the top 12 after 4 weeks of the season. But maybe 2021 is an outlier. So now let's move on to 2022. The top 12 finishers in 2022 were Justin Jefferson, Tyreek Hill, Davante Adams, Stefon Diggs, A.J. Brown, CeeDee Lamb, Jalen Waddle, Amon-Ra St. Brown, Amari Cooper, Devontae Smith, Mike Evans, and T. Higgins. Right off the bat, you can see that the top 4 finishers started hot and stayed hot. A.J. Brown, though, he went from wide receiver 10 up to wide receiver 5. CeeDee Lamb went from wide receiver 13 up to wide receiver 6. Jalen Waddle stayed hot. Amon-Ra stayed hot. Amari Cooper was wide receiver 25 after 4 weeks, finished as the wide receiver 9. Devontae Smith, he was the wide receiver 32 through 4 weeks, finished as the wide receiver 10. Mike Evans was the wide receiver 18, and T. Higgins was the wide receiver 12, finished as the wide receiver 12. So once again, a few wide receivers that were outside the top 12 through 4 weeks, yet found a way to claw their way back into it. Now we go to 2023. Last year's top 12 finishers at the wide receiver position were CeeDee Lamb, Tyreek Hill, Amon-Ra St. Brown, Mike Evans, A.J. Brown, Puka Nacua, DJ Moore, Keenan Allen, Deebo Samuel, Ja'Marr Chase, Stefon Diggs, and Brandon Ayuk. And last year is where things got a little bit interesting. Through 4 weeks, CeeDee Lamb was the wide receiver 16, finished as the wide receiver 1 overall. Tyreek Hill stayed at the wide receiver 2. Amon-Ra St. Brown was the wide receiver 11, jumped up to the wide receiver 3. Then we have a stretch of Mike Evans, A.J. Brown, and Puka Nacua all staying inside the top 10. DJ Moore was the wide receiver 13. He jumped up to the wide receiver 7 by season's end. Then we had Keenan Allen, started off hot, got injured. We know that, probably would have finished even higher had he stayed on the field. Deebo Samuel was the wide receiver 15, finished as the wide receiver 9. How about Jamar Chase? He was the wide receiver 27 through 4 weeks, finished as the wide receiver 10. Stephon Diggs, we know he fizzled late in the season, went from wide receiver 4 down to wide receiver 11. And then Brandon Ayuk finished as the wide receiver 12 and was the wide receiver 12 through 4 weeks. Now, if we total up those 36 players, 12 from each year, 14 of them were actually outside the top 12 after 4 weeks, yet finished inside the top 12 at season's end. That's almost 40% of the players that we just went through. So I think we can say that the precedent has been set for wide receivers to start a little bit slow, but still have that potential to finish top 12 at the position. Now, obviously, it's not going to happen all the time, of course, but we need to look at a few of these guys' overall situation to see if this is something they can bounce back from here in 2024. So now let's go ahead and transition into a few players who've started off a little bit slow this year and try to figure out whether or not they have what it takes to bounce back. Now let's go ahead and start off with Zay Flowers of the Baltimore Ravens. He's currently the wide receiver 47 overall, and people are getting a little bit worried, and it's really because he's disappeared the last 2 weeks of the season after getting 21 targets in the first 2 games of the season. Now, the Dallas Cowboys held him in check, but he also played in the lowest percentage of snaps in a game so far this year that week. And then last week, Buffalo couldn't stop Derrick Henry or Justice Hill, so they didn't need to throw the ball to Zay Flowers at all. It's not like there's everyone else in Baltimore catching passes except for Zay Flowers. That's not the case at all. He has 13 more targets and 8 more receptions than any other wide receiver on this team. He also has 4 red zone looks through 4 games, which is great, and Lamar Jackson is delivering him a catchable target rate of 72%. If you watch film, he is always open. But this is nothing new. Baltimore is always going to be a run-heavy team. They are every single year. We had to expect that some weeks were just going to be dominated by Derrick Henry like they have been the last 2 weeks. Over the last 2 weeks, Derrick Henry has had 53 touches, 383 total yards, and 4 touchdowns. In just 2 weeks, those numbers are totally absurd. But what that's also doing is making future defenses really put more defenders inside the box to try to stop Derrick Henry. What does that do to the passing game of an NFL offense? It creates more one-on-one opportunities and gives players like Zay Flowers the opportunity to rack up some more targets in the near future. I fully expect his production to increase here in the coming weeks. As of right now, he's only 10 points away from being a top 24 fantasy wide receiver. So sure, he started a little bit slow, but 10 points over the rest of the season is not that big of a number to make up. I can still see him finishing inside the top 24. Now, Brandon Ayuk is another name that a lot of people are panicking on, and they really don't know what to do with. He hasn't cracked 50 yards receiving in a game yet this season, even despite playing in games without Deebo Samuel and George Kittle and Christian McCaffrey. And now we have Deebo back. We have Kittle back. Juwan Jennings has taken a step forward in this offense, and we're still not really seeing a whole lot of Brandon Ayuk. But did you know this? Even last year, where Brandon Ayuk finished the season as the wide receiver 12 overall, he had less than 60 yards receiving in 50% of his games played. Through week 8 of last season, he'd only found the end zone 2 times, only 2 touchdowns in 8 weeks, and both of those came in week 1. That was a huge stretch where he didn't find the end zone. And really my point in saying that is we've seen him go through streaks before in the past. This is nothing out of the ordinary, especially since he really didn't participate much this offseason. He started a little bit slow. He still has 5 red zone targets in 4 games. Where the struggle has really been is drops, but not only that. Listen to this stat. Only 12 catchable targets has he received in 4 games. That's a catchable target rate of only 60% and ranks him as the wide receiver 70 in that metric. So yes, Ayuk has started off a little bit slow, but it's not all on him. Brock Purdy is to blame for some of this as well. Now, this overall team and this overall offense is too good for them to not get better as the season goes on. Brandon Aiyuk has had back-to-back years with at least 75 catches and 1,000 yards, and I will be shocked if he's not in the neighborhood of those numbers once again come season end here in 2024. What about Garrett Wilson of the New York Jets? He's currently the wide receiver 43, and a lot of people, myself included, expected a lot more production from Garrett Wilson with a healthy Aaron Rodgers. But now to start this young season, Aaron Rodgers is looking the way of Allen Lazard, Mike Williams even last week, and Garrett Wilson owners are starting to develop bald spots. But this is where it's important. This is where it's important to dig a little bit deeper, right? Because he's had some tough matchups the last couple of weeks against New England, and then had Patrick Surtain and the Denver Broncos last week. He's still on the field over 90% of the time. He ranks 9th among all wide receivers in the NFL in targets with 34. He ranks 3rd among all wide receivers in the NFL in red zone targets with 5. But just like we discussed a little bit earlier with Brandon Aiyuk, one of the biggest issues that Garrett Wilson has had is getting catchable targets. It's absolutely great that he ranks 9th in targets, but he ranks 62nd in catchable targets, and that is not great. So because of that, in reality, he's only gotten 17 catchable targets this season. The dude has 20 receptions, so he's out there even catching the ones that he shouldn't be catching. He's had some tough matchups, but let's also not forget that these were the first few games that Aaron Rodgers has had coming off of a torn Achilles as well. I expect better days coming the second half of the NFL season. Okay, if you've reached this point in the video, I want to know how you're feeling. So leave me a comment down below in the comment section with either hashtag I'm chill, as in you're starting to feel a little bit better, or hashtag I'm terrified. I'm trying to help some of the anxiety out there, but I want to know if it's working, so let me know down below in the comment section. But anyway, next player, Tyreek Hill, Miami Dolphins, currently the wide receiver 28 overall in fantasy football, and this one right here is 100% due to the injury of Tua Tagovailoa. Because if Tua's out there on the field right now, we're not even talking about Tyreek Hill in this episode. So I'm going to put all of this right now on the Dolphins organization. How do you have a quarterback that has a history of concussions, multiple big-time pass-catching weapons, a playoff window that is still open, and no viable backup quarterback? The Colts knew, right? They knew that Anthony Richardson was susceptible to injuries. They invested in wide receivers. They drafted Adonai Mitchell. They have Michael Pittman and Josh Downs. They knew that if Anthony Richardson goes down, we need another capable option, so they brought in Joe Flacco. If Joe Flacco is in Miami right now, we're not worried about Tyreek Hill either. Heck, even if they would have brought in somebody like Ryan Tannehill, it may even be better than what it is right now. But they didn't. They kept Skylar Thompson. They have Tim Boyle, and that is just stupid. Oh, but a lot of people were saying that, hey, they brought in Pro Bowl quarterback Tyler Huntley. Stop with that. The dude was like a 4th alternate onto the Pro Bowl team. He has 8 career passing touchdowns to 7 career interceptions in 5 years of NFL play. He is not what this team needs to really supply Tyreek Hill and Jalen Waddle each and every week. Now there's rumors starting to float around that Tyreek Hill could be traded. Is it possible that he returns to Kansas City? Now, I'm not here to speculate, but could it happen? Maybe. What if he stays in Miami though? We don't even know when or if Tua is going to return this season. So as of right now, with Tyreek in Miami and the unknown of the quarterback position, it is going to be a total crapshoot all year long. Do I expect him to bounce back? No, not with the current quarterback play. No, I'm not here saying that Tyler Huntley isn't a decent NFL quarterback. He's mobile. He can make some things happen. He can maybe even put up some decent numbers. Is he going to supply Tyreek Hill and Jalen Waddle to our expectations? Absolutely not. So when we look down at our bench and if we see Tyreek Hill there, just know it's the Dolphins organization to blame, not Tyreek Hill. Which will then take us to DJ Moore of the Chicago Bears, currently the wide receiver 34 overall, and this was really a worry coming into the season. We talked about this all offseason. There are so many weapons in this offense, and we have an unknown rookie quarterback in Caleb Williams. Now, the target share is great, but the quality of targets hasn't really been there. He only has a catchable target rate of 64% so far on the season. Now, he's on the field, he's getting looks, he just hasn't been able to hardly do anything after the catch like we've seen him do a lot in his career. Because for his career, coming into this season, he was averaging 14 yards per reception. This season, only 8.6 yards per reception. How about last year he averaged 8.6 air yards per reception? Do you know what air yards is? That's the amount of yardage that a ball travels through the air prior to the catch. That was 8.6 last year. This year, 4.8. Really, they're just dumping the ball off to him short and not getting him the ball in space where he can actually do something with it after the catch. Now, we've already seen Keenan Allen banged up a little bit, which should definitely help get targets the way of DJ Moore, but they still have Rome Odunze and Cole Kmet, and both of those guys have already shown that they can be relied upon heavily in this offense as well. Now, I have no doubt that he's going to finish higher than wide receiver 34 on the season if he stays healthy, but where I get a little bit concerned is I have a feeling he's going to have a few huge games, which really makes his overall season look better at the end of the year. But from a fantasy football perspective, it's going to be totally boom or bust. Do not be surprised if he has a game at some point in the near future where he goes out and puts up 30 fantasy points. But also, don't be surprised when the next 3 games he plays, he scores like 5. Now, no, this is not a DJ Moore issue. There's just not enough to go around in this offense to make him a consistent high performer, especially with the way that Caleb Williams has started off. Not all bad, but not all great either. So is it time to jump ship on DJ Moore? Probably not, because honestly, he's doing what a lot of people expected him to do at the start of the season. Hopefully you're not reliant upon him, and hopefully you can just play him in some good matchups. And lastly, George Pickens, Pittsburgh Steelers, currently the wide receiver 38 overall in fantasy football, but it's crazy. When George Pickens sees targets, he produces. Going back to last year, George Pickens has had 100+ receiving yards in every single game he's seen at least 8 targets. So why? Why does he only have 5 games with 8+ targets over his last 21 regular season games? Make it make sense. Now, personally, I blame Arthur Smith, but it does look like Justin Fields is starting to look the way of George Pickens more and more, and that's all we need, just volume. Everything else is there. The deep targets are there. The red zone targets are there. The catchable targets are being delivered. We already know that George Pickens is great at getting those contested catches. It all comes back to that 8+ targets a game. If he can get that, he's a top 15 fantasy wide receiver, no doubt, rest of the season. No one else in this offense is there to really command a large target share, so there's really no reason why this shouldn't happen. Come on, Arthur Smith, stop sucking again. So just like I said at the start of the show, and I know this is hard, it's hard for me too, we gotta have patience with some of these slower starting studs. As we saw today, history shows us that there's a chance that even if you start slow, it doesn't mean you still can't finish high. Now, I really hope I was able to put some of your fears aside in today's show. If I did, do me a favor and hit the like button if you haven't already, and then consider subscribing. We greatly appreciate the support, and we're having a great time hanging out with Headliner Nation here the entire fantasy football season. Now, I'm gonna go ahead and get out of here for the day. Hopefully you guys enjoy the rest of your day though, but most importantly, do your part to make the world a better place. I'm a headliner.